Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper, and I'm here today with Patrick de Suza, the CTO of Grain. Good afternoon, Patrick.
Good afternoon, Mark. How are you?
Hey, good. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much.
I see you got a bright yellow shirt on. Who's that
Yeah,
supporting? Looks like
so
soccer.
yeah. So this is the national team of Colombia.
Ah,
I'm not Colombian, but I have a lot of Colombian friends. And during the World Cup, we would all watch the games together. So I would support them and watch with them.
very cool. That's
Yeah,
interesting. So to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
sure. So I'm born and raised in New York. First generation American. My parents are from the West Indies.
Hmm.
I was always a very techie type kid. And so I was very much into dissecting radios and televisions and computers. And so naturally that progressed into a career in computer science and computer engineering. So I went to MIT and I studied electrical engineering and computer science.
Hmm.
But after graduating, I ultimately ended up focusing more towards computer science. And at the time, I wanted to be in New York. And back then, there was no Facebook, no Google, no Snapchat or anything like that in New York. So as a computer scientist and wanting to live in New York City, what you did back then was work at a bank. And
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up on Wall Street. So I ended up working for a financial company. Wasn't really in the cards, but it happened because I wanted to be near the home. And I wasn't necessarily planning on staying there very long, but ended up staying there for 13 years.
Wow.
And so that was my only job after college, and
Hmm.
then ultimately left and started Grain.
Wow. So let me get this right. You started in finance in New York in about 2007, and then we had a few problems here in 2008, didn't we?
Yeah. So actually, I started in 2005. So I
Okay.
got a couple good years in.
Mm-hmm.
Wall Street was the Wall Street that people knew and loved or hated, depending on your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But then, boom, like you said, market crashed and things changed drastically. And that had a direct impact on our experience as technologists on Wall Street as well.
Well, I would imagine, yes.
Yeah.
So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as an employee and an employer?
You know what? I love remote work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you two perspectives. The first perspective is from the standpoint of when I was still working for Goldman Sachs. I always had this sense that FaceTime was overrated.
Mm-hmm.
When I say FaceTime, I don't mean the app.
I
I mean
know.
FaceTime as in being in the office and, you know, being literally in front of people. I always had the suspicion that it wasn't necessary. Um, and so I would take the opportunity to work from home when I could, when I was still working at Goldman Sachs. But there was always a little contention because people didn't like you doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, some managers were more flexible with it than others, but generally, it was somewhat frowned upon unless you absolutely had to do it. But when we started our own company, it was necessarily remote because we were all in different places: New York, California, Florida, Pennsylvania. And so because we were spread out, we didn't have a central location. We were working remote from day one.
Mm.
And I think because we built that culture from the ground up as being remote from day one, it never was an issue for us.
Mm.
And we absolutely love it.
Interesting. And so you don't have an office anywhere?
We do have an office. So
Oh.
we do have an office in downtown Oakland,
Mm.
which we would go to, myself and Christian, our CEO, would go to because we're out here in Oakland. And when our now full-time hire, he used to be an intern last summer, the one who lives in Pennsylvania, he was in the office with us last summer as well. The rest of the team is remote. Part of the reason why we have the office is the nature of our business. As a credit company, we are obligated to have a physical
Mm.
presence. So we have the office for that reason. So we'll go there. Now during COVID, we still have the office. We're not there as often, but
Mm.
yes.
So interesting. So you have to have it for compliance reasons. I'm just curious. Would something like a WeWork work, or do you have to have a physical office?
Yeah, we work would absolutely work. So we do have a dedicated office. We don't use WeWork. It's another co-working space
Mm.
company called Regis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so we have a Regis office, and it's a small office, but it gets the job done.
Yeah, there's a Regis like 3 minutes from me. So I've actually
Yeah,
been to that one.
yeah.
So so what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think could be done differently to make it more effective?
I think remote employment is the future for a number of reasons. There's absolutely a necessity now because of COVID. And I think what that's done is it's allowed us to really see that it's possible. So for people who had a strong aversion to it, now they're seeing that, okay, this is actually possible, and it's productive. Um, and now there's a lot more tooling that's
Hmm.
available, right? So Zoom and Hangouts and all these different applications that are built and centered around making remote work easier. There's things like Slack, right? So now instead of doing remote work and having to send emails sort of asynchronously, now you can communicate in real time through Slack. So all these things are making it much more productive to be remote.
Hmm.
Um, I will give you the flip side. The flip side is that um, for folks who have the situation where, and this is where remote work sometimes gets a bad rap, because it's COVID and because kids are home.
Hmm.
Sometimes workers can't be as productive because they have to watch their kids because they're not in school.
Hmm.
But once that sort of goes away and kids can go back to school, and so that excuse is gone, I think the productivity we'll find is going to be much higher. No commute, so you're
Hmm.
saving time. I remember being in New York commuting and doing an hour and a half each way,
Yep.
which was not fun.
Hmm.
So you're saving time there, you're getting extra sleep, and you're going to get extra time to do what you need to do. So
Yeah.
I think the future of remote is actually very bright.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. I know you've been in the Bay Area just a little while and living in
Yeah.
Oakland. You never had that commute into the city of San Francisco. And
I've
it's
heard
also,
stories.
I've done it. It's an hour and a half. Or you're on the BART and you're like this,
Yep.
right? And
Sardines. Yep.
how long have you been in the Bay Area?
I I've been in here for what, 7 months now.
Okay.
I moved here in January. We did Y Combinator, and so
Okay.
we did the winter batch. We started in January, so that's when I moved here.
So you had a little taste of the traffic here. The traffic is so much better.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I've experienced traffic in New York as
Mm,
well.
yeah.
I wasn't driving to work, so I didn't experience it from that standpoint, but certainly on the subway, definitely had
Yeah.
the Sardine experience.
Yeah. I can realize I used to live in New York. I know what
Yeah.
that's like. So what is the story behind Grain? Who are your customers? How did you get started? All those things.
Sure. So where we got started, so two of us, so we have three co-founders. Two of us actually overlapped sometime at Goldman Sachs. We didn't know each other well at that point in time. I was in technology, of course, and he was in legal. His name is Carl Memnon. And it turns out that Carl was really good friends with another guy named Christian Joseph, who was working in Silicon Valley as a product manager at various companies, most recently at Dropbox. And so those two knew each other from childhood. And
Hmm.
so they had initially started the company, and then Christian, the CEO, was looking for someone to come in as a CTO. He needed a technical co-founder.
Hmm.
And we had a mutual friend, someone who I went to college with, who was also working out here in the Bay Area. And he introduced Christian and I to each other. And we spoke, had a couple conversations, and it just made total sense. It just made total sense. The short version of it. I did meet with Carl. He was in New York at the time, so he kind of interviewed me for the position of technical co-founder in a way, and that conversation went well. And so we kind of just clicked
Hmm.
and went from there. In terms of who our customers are, there are different, I guess, different cohorts of customers, right? One cohort of customer are people who are very um, adverse to debt.
Hmm.
Whatever reason, it could be that they experienced something during the financial crisis, or they have a bunch of student loan debt. And so they're a little bit wary of credit cards. And so they're looking for an alternative because they realize that they need to build credit.
Hmm.
But there's somewhat distrusting of banks and distrusting of traditional credit cards, who more than likely are attempting to get them into long-term debt that they have to pay back over a long period of time.
Hmm.
So that's one cohort. Another cohort of customer are people who are just thin file,
Hmm.
meaning they don't really have any sort of distrust of banks or debt, but they just thin file, and so it's harder for them to get a decent credit offer where they can actually build credit in an affordable way.
Hmm.
And I think the last cohort of customer are folks who, for whatever reason, has had some financial troubles. And we've heard a bunch of stories from customer interviews. People who had medical expenses, they had to take care of a sick parent.
Mm-hmm.
or someone who is going through or went through a divorce, right? And these things cost money, and they had to utilize some credit, and their credit score isn't as great as it should be now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But these are good people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we do, because we don't utilize credit scores and we're underwriting based upon cash flows, if these people have jobs, or whether that's a traditional job or a gig economy job, as long as there's income coming in and we analyze that, now we're able to underwrite them based upon what they can actually afford financially, as opposed to what their credit score says about their ability to pay back. Right. And so I think our customer base follows those three cohorts. And so far it's been great.
Mm-hmm. And when did you form the company again?
We formed a company back in 2017.
Okay, so 3 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a funny feeling you're going to have more customers in the future with with the current situation. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned that, because what we're actually seeing is a lot of banks are pulling cards off the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so as people need credit, it's becoming less accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason the banks are doing it is you can't really blame them, right? They have some of a blind spot. They can't, somebody might have an 800 credit score, but they just lost their job.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't really underwrite that person appropriately,
Yeah.
right? Whereas we can see that person's income and their cash flow because of the
Mm-hmm.
nature of our product and connecting your bank account. And so they're pulling away because things seem more risky. For us, we're growing like crazy because we can mitigate that risk because we understand there's financial circumstances.
Interesting. And do you do consumer only or do you do business also?
We are primarily consumer.
Yeah.
We do not do any official business loans. All of our, well, let me clarify. I said loans, but it's a revolving line of credit. It's
Mm-hmm.
not formally a fixed term loan. So it's like a credit card without the physical card. Um, so no, we don't formally do business credit lines. That being said, if a business owner happens to connect their business account and they can prove that they are the sole owner of that account,
Mm-hmm.
we'll allow it.
Okay.
But they definitely won't get what they
Right.
would expect for a business line. It'll still be the consumer limits.
Yeah. So it'd be like a solopreneur would be a good example.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Very cool. So it's almost like you started your company. When you started your company, you went remote right away. Just by it, you had to, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
So how did you do that? I mean, that's a lot of places can't just do that. How did you do it?
yeah. You know what? We had weekly meetings. We first started with a weekly meeting, so we'd have I guess a stand up or a status meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it essentially was we get on the line. Wasn't even video. We just get on the phone
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about what we worked on, what we accomplished, what are we having any issues with, any blockers, and what we need in terms of help from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. We did that once a week. At the time, at least two of us were still working full time,
Mm-hmm.
and we eventually made the decision that we need to do this full time, and so we made that jump
Mm-hmm.
into the company. However, once that happened, now it freed us up to actually meet a little bit more often,
Mm-hmm.
right? So instead of meeting late at night
Mm-hmm.
once a week, it was like 2 times a week, maybe during the day, maybe at night, but we had a little bit more time to do so. And then finally, I think because we were small, I mean, we're still relatively small, but I think because we were small, it made it easier as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there's something to be said about that. I don't want to make it seem like remote work is a Pangea, right? There's
Right.
absolutely a culture you have to build, and there are some limitations. But I think to the degree that a company is scaled out, and that company is what I call FaceTime based or politically based. Politically
Mm-hmm.
based meaning you need to spend a lot of time sort of
Mm-hmm.
talking to people in these off conversations in order to progress in that company. You can find remote work to be a limitation.
Mm-hmm.
Our company culture is not like that, right? Even though we're small, our company culture is very much not about smoozing up to anybody or trying to curry favor with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's, are you getting the job done?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Period.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it doesn't matter if you're here or if you're in Europe. It doesn't really matter. If you're getting the job done, communicating effectively, and you are not a hindrance to anybody else,
Hmm.
we're solid.
Yeah. And I've talked to some other executives that basically their opinion was that going remote actually was the great equalizer from a culture standpoint because
Yeah.
because you don't have that snoozing up, at the office.
Yeah. And Mark, I'll be honest with you. I come from a culture where we're sort of taught, maybe not directly, but you sort of indirectly get taught that when you work, you just put your head down,
Hmm.
work really hard, and then you'll be rewarded for it, right?
Yeah.
But you start to realize over time in certain cultures that that's not going to work in terms of getting you to the level you want to get to, right?
Right.
Um, Sometimes they say the loudest mouth gets fed or something like
Hmm.
that. I don't remember the exact quote.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, so you can't just keep your head down. And if you're in a company culture where you're just keeping your head down and working, you may miss some opportunities,
Yes.
right? And so for the people who excel at
Hmm.
the sort of, I'm going to
Political.
use the word political, but
Yeah. Right.
you know what I mean? Some
Yeah.
of the political maneuvering, for people who excel at that, remote work is actually not great for them.
Hmm.
But for the people who are heads down, let me work hard and let me let the fruits of my labor show and be rewarded for that, it actually helps those people. So in that sense, I agree with you. It definitely is an equalizer.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I think more companies are putting in different types of metrics to measure work. So it is actually helping. And you're a techie like I am. You know that techie people like to just tell me what you want me to do, and I'm gonna go and do it. And if I have questions,
Absolutely.
I'll call you. Right?
Absolutely. Our head of engineering is our sergeant at arms, sergeant at arms. When we have meetings and stand-ups,
Mm.
he's guys, we're running over time. We
Yep.
gotta we gotta keep it moving because
Yep.
he's like me, he's an engineer too, and he's trying to get back to work. So
Yeah, I
totally
agree.
agree
So
with you.
so it's interesting. We've talked a little bit about the pandemic, and that caused everybody to go remote. On March 16th was the day in the Bay Area. I remember it well.
Yep, I remember very well
The
also.
day before St. Patrick's Day. I'm Irish, so I remember.
My name is Patrick, so I remember that too.
Right. And so you already were remote, but did it cause any roadblocks or challenges that you didn't expect for both you or your partners or your customers?
That's a good question. I don't think it caused any roadblock from a working standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we did stop going to the office, but that was okay. We ended up just purchasing some desks, some extra monitors for
Mm-hmm.
inside the home. I actually live with one of my co-founders,
Yeah.
CEO. So we purchased some office materials so that we can work from home. So that was fine. I think the only thing that did affect us, well, I'll mention two things. One, because it was all very new at that point in time, investors were a little bit more skittish than they are
Mm-hmm.
now. So raising money was a bit more challenging at the initial point when the pandemic hit. But then also we had to take a step back to try to understand what does this mean from an underwriting standpoint, from a risk mitigation standpoint. And
Mm-hmm.
so we purposely and intentionally slowed growth a bit when the pandemic initially hit. And we spent some time to retool and tweak our software, our underwriting algorithms to help us be able to mitigate what no one foresaw.
Mm-hmm.
No one foresaw like this mass level of unemployment, right? And so
Right.
we made some tweaks. And once we made those tweaks, then we hit the gas pedal again and started growing. But initially when the pandemic hit, that did affect us because we had to slow down growth a little bit.
Yeah. But things are good now.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what you
All
say.
indicators so far, things are looking very good.
Well, that's good. So finally, there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups. You've already got a remote model. How important do you think that's going to be going forward for companies that need to hire, quality talent and they need to hire it in a hurry?
Oh, it's critical. It's critical. I think companies are starting to realize that they have to get out of the old model of
Mm-hmm.
doing recruiting, right? Which is you have a phone screen and then maybe like another phone screen, and then you bring in that person and you do like this super day. Well, we used to call them super days, right? You just this whole super day and you go through maybe 5 different interviews with someone, and then you shake hands or you don't, and then you make a decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work, right? So there needs to be another way to do it. And I think the fact that we're forced to be remote now is actually helping us rethink that whole recruitment process.
Mm.
Right. So yes, you may still do your screen, but guess what? Well, instead of inviting them in for a super day, get them on Zoom, get them on whatever platform, do a video call, talk to them. You could even do some we call peer programming, right?
Mm.
You can get on a shared platform, do some peer programming as part of the interview as well.
Mm.
And so I think that's not just important for remote work. I think it's important in general because it makes more sense. You don't have to fly somebody out, put them up in a
Right.
hotel, pay for their flight. So it's more economical, especially for a company like us who's smaller. And of course, we're watching every single penny that goes out the door. And so the remote model in terms of the hiring process is actually very important for us as well.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because I think people are starting to adjust and they're starting to say, hey, I kind of like this. I mean, you see it more and more every day, companies saying we're going 100% remote, right?
Yeah. I think Square and Twitter.
Square and Twitter have both announced it.
Yep, 100%. Indefinitely.
Yes, right.
Indefinitely, yeah.
And a number of large companies have said for the rest of 2020, like Google and Facebook and the other big
Amazon, right?
Yeah, Amazon and Apple.
Yeah. It's a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a smart thing to do. Yeah.
So, well, Patrick, this has been great. Very informative. I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it has been. And have a great day.
Thank you. You too.